Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian Online Seminar Group. First, keep your phones off, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Paolo Quattrone. Pablo is one of the top accounting thought leaders in the world. He is a professor of accounting, governance, and society, and the director of the Center for the analysis of investment risk at Alliance Manchester Business School. At Oxford, he is an associate fellow of Saïd Business School and an honorary senior research fellow of Italian studies at Oxford, which he co-founded during his time at the university. A early international scholar, Pablo served on the standing scientific committee of the European Accounting Association for several years. He sits on the editorial boards of major academic journals such as the Accounting Organization and Society, and he has been associate editor of the British Accounting Review and the Critical Perspective on Accounting. And his research has been published into banking journals in accounting. Now we will start our seminar with dear Professor Paolo Quattrone.
Okay, thank you and welcome to this seminar. Thanks for coming. It's a great pleasure. I've been following what Mohammed has been doing in these last few years. Great success, and so he should be congratulated for the efforts that he has made so far. Today we are going to discuss, it's not one single paper in a sense, it's a couple of papers. One that I'm currently working on with a couple of colleagues, Patrizio Fardini and Pasquale Ruggero from respectively University of Cagliari and the University of Siena, and that is about the history of IRI. But then I also want to share with you a couple of other things that I'm currently doing. So the title of the seminar today is "The Mystery of Accounting: From Calculating Value to Debating the Common Good." This paper, in a sense, links back to a famous quote from Anthony Hopwood. He already made a similar quote in a paper in 1983, but then it was in 1987 that he changed it a bit and moved from a positive understanding of what accounting is to a negative, I would say, understanding of what accounting is. And he said, accounting has the tendency to become what it was not. So we believe that accounting is about calculating, efficiency, for instance, and then we discover that accounting is about something else. Then we understand that accounting is about disciplining the workforce, and then we understand that accounting is about something else. To the point that in one article, I think it was 91 and 93, I can't remember now, Miller and Napier said, accounting does not have any essence. I've been dealing with this couple of quotes for most of my career, and if you allow me a bit of self-advertising, these are a few papers where I've been dealing with this problem that accounting, despite the fact that it is difficult to define, despite the fact that it's got this tendency to become other than itself, it's actually quite successful and pervasive. So it's almost everywhere. So this is one of my main research interests. In the paper that I'm going to discuss today, we look at a further instance of how accounting has become other than itself, or in a sense how accounting goes back to what, in my opinion, it has always been, and that is something that relates to the interrogation of what we do as individuals, what we do as citizens, what we do as entrepreneurs, what we do when we do things. So a bit more about the interrogation of our morality and and how we operate in societies, and how we establish or create the conditions for social computation. So what we do, the way in which we look at this feature of accounting is to look at a case that is, at least within this context, particularly interesting. That is the case of the Istituto per la Ricostruzione Industriale, the Institute for the Industrial Reconstruction. So this was a public holding founded by Mussolini in 1933. And it was established as a temporary organization to deal with the 1929 financial crisis. And so its aim at the beginning was to fix the financial crisis, and then collecting all the bad debts from the banks, fixed in the banks, and then it was supposed to be dismantled. But instead, it remained. And not only remained, but it became an important engine in the Italian economy, in particular towards the end of the Second World War, and especially after the end of the Second World War. This is also due to the fact that IRI administered the funds of the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. Just to give you an idea of how big IRI was in the 1950s and 1960s, there is now a huge history, so 6 volumes of history on the history of this company. And with Patrizia and Pasquale, we have contributed to a chapter. There is another chapter in this in one of these 6 volumes that just to give the idea of how big IRI was, tells this story. So if you were a tourist in the 50s and you would travel to Italy from the United States, very likely you would board on one of the most beautiful transatlantic ships. That was the Michelangelo. Michelangelo was built by Fincantieri, that was owned by IRI. If you came by air, very likely you would fly with Alitalia, that by the way stands for always late in taking off, always late in approaching. Mahmoud Azzamel told me once. And Alitalia was owned by IRI. If you go to the airport and then you want to hire a car, a beautiful Alfa Romeo Duetto, that is a symbol of the Dolce Vita, Alfa Romeo was owned by IRI. Then you take the motorway, the first and the longest motorway built in Europe, that went from Naples to Milan, and that was built by Autostrade, that was owned by IRI. Then you get to Milan, you make a phone call, and you give a ring to your family to say, look, I survived the Italian traffic and way of driving, and you would use a company that was called SIP, and SIP was owned by IRI. Then you go downstairs, go to the patisserie shop and buy a typical Christmas cake in Milan, which is the panettone, and panettone was made by Motta, that was also owned by IRI. So IRI, along with ENI, and which is still operating, well, IRI was privatized in 1992, with ENI and Enel accounted for several points of Italian GDP. Now, what is the story? The story is that the Vatican already in 1940 understands that the decision of the fascist regime to enter into the war was disastrous. And so one person, the name of this person will not tell you anything. So that was Giovanni Battista Montini. So not possibly a very known name to you, but if I say the person who then became Pope Paul VI, started to gather around him a series of Italian Catholic intellectuals to understand what the contour of a modern social democracy could be after the end of the war, because their bet was that the fascist regime would collapse because they would lose the war. And so one of these people that were tasked with this idea of gathering the Italian intellectuals was Sergio Paronetto, who died particularly young, I mean, in 1945. But when he passed away, he already had a long career within IRI, up to the point that he became the Vice Director General of the institute. Sergio Paronetto started to organize a series of meetings in his house in Via Reno. And then also edited an academic journal, Studium. And in all of these activities, what they discussed was what it means to be a good Catholic, what it means to be a good Catholic when you are a politician, what it means to be a good Catholic when you are a lawyer, what it means a good Catholic when you are an accountant and when you run large organizations like IRI. People who went to these meetings are people like the first president of the Italian Republic, Alcide Gasperi, Aldo Moro was secretary of the Christian Democracy and then killed in the 1970s by the Red Brigades, Giulio Andreotti, one of the most important Italian politicians, Giovanni Battista Montini, the future Pope Paul VI. So quite a lot of people, including these other two figures. One was Pasquale Saraceno, a professor of industrial economics at Bocconi University, who was basically the architect of the governance of IRI, but also the budgeting and planning at IRI. And you have to think about Italy at the end of the Second World War. It was a very fragmented country. It was a country that went into the Civil War, and so you had in the same family, you could have one member of the Communist Party who was part of the partisans, and one member of the Fascist Party, and so they would kill each other at lunch on Sunday. So a very fragmented country with a huge communist party, the second largest, actually the first largest communist party outside USSR, with a strong series of trade unions. So the trade unions in Italy were very powerful. The communist ones, the Catholic ones, and the socialist ones. We had three, and we still have three different trade unions. So Saraceno had the role of defining the contour of the governance of this company that operated in the country that was really in between the capitalist, the corporate capitalism of the Americans and the socialist and communist ideologies of the USSR. And so what he did was to create this strange architecture that was then copied in many different countries in Europe and outside Europe. So the holding was public and was owned by the state, but then the subsidiaries operated in the market. And so the public holding had the role of pursuing social purposes, while the subsidiaries had to pursue efficiency because they had to operate within the market. Another person that was interesting there is Ezio Vanoni, who was part of these meetings that happened in Via Reno, which ended with the publication of a code, which was called the Camaldoli Code, from the name of the monastery where these people met in Tuscany, and he became Minister of Finance. And these three people were the main authors of this code. And in this code, they defined the contour of what it meant to be a good Catholic. And a good Catholic had as his or her purpose that one of pursuing the common good. But they define common good in a very interesting way. So the common good is, or pursuing the common good, means to create the conditions for the individuals to pursue their personal interest. And so when the American, it's an interesting thing, because basically you pursue the common good. In pursuing the common good, you have to make sure that your fellow citizens can pursue their personal interest. And when they act, they have to pursue the common good. And so they have to allow you to pursue your personal interests. So that was a definition that created the necessity for different platforms of mediation. Now, when the American came to Italy and gave money to Italy through the Marshall Plan, not only they gave money, but they also gave accounting and business knowledge. And they said, this is how you will have to organize your income statement, which is the income statement that now in the Anglo-American world they use. So you start from revenues, you've got the cost of goods sold, got gross margin, operating expenses, operating profit, financial income, profit before tax, and tax and net income. The Italians at that time were a bit more, let's say, intelligent. I would say that the Italians that we have now said, look, this is not an income statement. This is a political statement. It states that the most important thing in your organization of the economy and society is the shareholder, and so one particular stakeholders amongst many. For us, the most important thing is the common good. And so they started to devise a different system of accounting and budgeting and planning that was developed not only for ERI, but also for ENI and NL, and not only at the level of the corporation, but also at the level of the state, because when Ezio Vanoni became Minister of Finance, basically, they also designed the Italian national accounting system based on the same principle of value added rather than pursuing profit. And the influence came through the presence of this other person. By the way, the interesting thing is that these three people came, so very important in defining modern or contemporary Italy, because they wrote the Camaldoli Code. This guy organized meetings at this place where there were also the same, not only the authors of the Camaldoli Code, but also the authors of the Italian Constitution. So this idea of pursuing the common good is not only translated into accounting solutions, but also into constitutional solutions. And they were all from the same village, which is an interesting thing. And then Saraceno was married to the sister of Vanoni, and Vanoni was a cousin of Baronetto. So like what John Paget says about Renaissance Florence, you have a strong link between three sets of ties: economic ties, so financial ties, family ties, and social ties. That is what made the Italian Renaissance, but this is also what made the Italian economic miracle in the 50s and 60s. Great influence also from Gino Zappa, was the supervisor of Pasquale Saraceno Bocconi University, who was the founder of the contemporary approach to management in Italy, which is called economia aziendale. And for him, the firm was an institution that did not have any purpose other than the satisfaction of the interests of those who belonged to it. So quite different from what we from the idea of corporate governance that we have today, where the corporation has got as primary interest that of safeguarding the interest of shareholders. And at the moment, we're talking about materiality, double materiality, dynamic materiality. That was very clear to them. It's not a matter of single materiality. It's a matter of a dynamic materiality, and we have to make sure that we have the right accounting solutions to deal with that. All of these people were profoundly Catholic. In the diaries that Baronetto was keeping, there is a phrase that captured my attention. I want to find the mystery of God in the cost accounting of Finsider, which is a large steel company in Italy. Why the mystery of God, and why this paper is not only about the mystery of accounting, but also the mystery of the common good? Because these guys came out of a period where, during the fascist regime and the Nazi regime, the idea of defining perfectly what is right and what is wrong led to huge tragedies, including, deportation, Auschwitz, concentration camps, and things of that kind. So they refrained from having a clear idea of what is right. They hated the idea of efficiency, because efficiency presupposes one clear objective that works as an ordering principle for all the rest. But if you are aware of the fact that societies are actually fragmented, if you're aware of the fact that individuals have different interests and this cannot be aligned against one clear objective, because that creates the problems that they had seen until 1943, then you really need to devise a different kind of system. Now, to show you what this meant for them, I want to show with you a short piece from a film by Paolo Sorrentino. Paolo Sorrentino won the Oscar a few years ago for The Great Beauty, a beautiful film about the decadence of Rome. This year he was candidate with another film that was called The Hand of God. But he's possibly, for his own statement, his best film is possibly one that is called Il Divo, the Divine. And that film is about one of the guys who went to these meetings organized by Paronetto in Via Reno, Giulio Andreotti. So this is a scene. Giulio Andreotti is towards the end of his career. He's reflecting on his career. He's in his flat in Rome. He's already under trial because he has been accused of many different things, including the instigation of the assassination of quite a few people, including Aldo Moro, one of the other people who participated to the meetings in Via Reno. And here we need to understand why these people were so much against the idea of truth, of true and fair views, of having a clear idea of what is right. So you may want to, it's in Italian, but with subtitles, so you can read the subtitles, but you want to observe also the scenography, the photography, the relationship between the chiaro and the scuro in Sorrentino's film. And then I'll move on quickly because I know that I don't have too much time.
Livia, sono gli occhi tuoi pieni che mi hanno folgorato un pomeriggio andato al cimitero del Verano. Si passeggiava e io scesi in quel luogo singolare per chiederti in sposa, ti ricordi? Sì, lo so, ti ricordi, gli occhi tuoi pieni e puliti e incantati non sapevano, non sanno e non sapranno, non hanno idea. Non hanno idea delle malefatte che il potere deve commettere per assicurare il benessere e lo sviluppo del paese. Per troppi anni il potere sono stato io, la mostruosa, inconfessabile contraddizione, perpetuare il male per garantire il bene. La contraddizione mostruosa che fa di me un uomo cinico e indecifrabile anche per te. Gli occhi tuoi pieni, puliti e incantati non sanno la responsabilità diretta o indiretta per tutte le stragi avvenute in Italia dal 1969 al 1984 e che hanno avuto per la precisione 236 morti e 817 feriti. A tutti i familiari delle vittime io dico sì, confesso, è stato anche per mia colpa, per mia grandissima colpa. Questo dico anche se non serve lo stragismo per destabilizzare il paese, provocare terrore, per isolare le parti politiche estreme e rafforzare i partiti di centro come la Democrazia Cristiana. L'hanno definita strategia della tensione, sarebbe più corretto dire strategia della sopravvivenza. Roberto, Michele, Giorgio, Carlo Alberto, Giovanni, Mino, il caro Aldo per vocazione o per necessità, ma tutti irriducibili amanti della verità, tutte bombe pronte ad esplodere che sono state disinnescate col silenzio finale. Tutti a pensare che la verità sia una cosa giusta e invece è la fine del mondo. E noi non possiamo consentire la fine del mondo in nome di una cosa giusta. Abbiamo un mandato noi, un mandato divino. Bisogna amare così tanto Dio per capire quanto sia necessario il male per avere il bene. Questo Dio lo sa e lo so anch'io.
So I hope that you could follow the script, but the important thing is all of these names that he mentioned are all the people that he has been accused of being the instigator of their assassination. Aldo Moro, Carlo Alberto della Chiesa, general of the Carabinieri, was killed in my hometown in Palermo. All of them thinking the truth is the right thing, but actually it is the end of the world. If there is a clear objective to pursue and everyone has to be aligned, there is no space for compromise. There is no space for mediation. Where can we mediate among the different interests that make our society and that cannot be aligned? It's much normal that they are misaligned, but we have to find a compromise between them. They translated this idea into a new format of income statement that they use for planning and budgeting at IRI from 1950 until I would say until the mid 70s, and quite successful in the 50s and 60s. And I don't know if you know how the value-added statement works, but basically you have revenues there. Then you have the purchase of goods and services, and then you define the value added. The value added that then is distributed to employees through salaries, to banks through interest, to the state through income taxes, to shareholders through dividends, and indeed to the firm through return earnings, because the firm was the institute where this mediation, this continuous mediation had to happen. This is an indifferent format of profit and loss. It does not have a single focus like the normal P&L that we nowadays use, where everything is channeled towards the interest of one particular category, that is the shareholder. Here, this is indifferent, and so this creates the preconditions for pursuing and interrogating that idea of common good. We do not know what common good is. It's mysterious, but we have to find techniques that it would be financial techniques, like in this case, or legal techniques, like in the case of the Constitution. Platforms where we explore what it means to pursue the common good and what this common good is. And so this was the precondition for mediating between the production and the distribution of value. So when they were doing planning and budgeting at IRI, knowing that IRI would account for several points of Italian GDP, they were saying, okay, we generate this income, but where do we generate them? Because the Americans wanted to invest all the money of the Marshall Plan in the north, because the north was the most productive area of Italy. But the Italians said, if we do that, what happens to the south? And so we need to reach a compromise there. And so where do we invest? Do we invest in Lombardy, or do we invest a bit in Lombardy, a bit in Puglia, a bit in Sicily, a bit in Campania, a bit everywhere? And how do we generate this income? Do we generate it with services? Do we generate it with infrastructure? Do we generate it with nuclear? Do we generate it with oil? Do we generate it with the chemical industry or whatever? And once then you have to distribute them, how do we distribute them? So we've got a huge communist party there, we've got trade unions, so we cannot make this stakeholder particularly important, but we cannot forget that stakeholder either, because without capital, you cannot pursue you cannot create the conditions for individuals to pursue their own personal interests. So they started this process where various contrasting interests were mediated through very specific forms of accounting, very technical forms of accounting. There were other solutions that, for instance, Saraceno developed in trying to understand when one incurred in an expense, how much of this expense was there because there was a social purpose to be pursued, and how much of that was there because there was an efficiency purpose to be pursued. So there were different things that they did, but this is possibly the most relevant one. one. And this was therefore the platform where, or through which, or thanks to which, not only they generated an economic miracle, so in the 50s and 60s in Italy, but also created the conditions for the social development of Italy. When I give this paper, I always remember that my grandfather didn't go to school. He didn't go to school. So my grandmother only did 3 classes in the elementary school. My mom didn't finish her school. And I got a degree. I was a faculty at Oxford. My uncles, all of them had degree, one in law, one in medicine, and one in economics. Within one generation from a person who did not even finish the primary school. And that was thanks to this continuous compromise that the Christian democracy in Italy allowed in the 50s and 60s. And of course, to reach this compromise, as Andreotti said, sometimes you have to do something really bad, but that is done in the interest of pursuing the mystery of the common good, not the truth of the common good that would be the end of the world, but the mystery of the common good that is instead the precondition for allowing social cohabitation. And so they did this at the national level. I'll skip this because we have to go fast. I'll possibly skip this or may come back to this in a moment. I'll say this very, very quickly maybe because it links to one of the papers that I showed before, and it links to the Catholic roots of accounting. Here you have the Jesuit cash box that is operated with 2 keys, one kept by the spokesperson for financial matter, the procurator, one kept by the rector, who is the spokesperson for non-financial matters. This represents means, and this represents ends. You cannot pursue God without money, but you will lose God if you pursue money. What is interesting here, and what they did also at Erie, is to count what is visible, material means, a value, a thing, in order to explore, to interrogate what is invisible, immaterial ends, values, not things. Common good is immaterial, but we use money in order to interrogate what we mean by it. We use accounting to reach a compromise on what we mean by common good. I've lost my, here it is. And going back to the Erie, they did this at the national level. So this is value added calculated for all the industrial sectors in which the state had a stake in through Erie, ENI, and later Enel. It was then here for Erie as a holding and the subsidiaries, and so you have also the possibility of calculating the value added per person, which was a measure of productivity when you looked at the single enterprise, not at the level of the holding, but the single firm, and this was the calculation of the value added per hour of labor, and to understand not only the efficiency of labor, but also how labor was remunerated, and make sure that the social dimension of that transaction was never forgotten. Now, this, in a sense, speaks to, and with this, in a sense, I end this part of the presentation on Erie. And if you have questions, possibly this is the right moment to ask them. So I'll pause for a moment. I have a bit of water. Because in a sense, from now on, I move towards why I'm interested in the mystery, why I want to place the mysterious at the core of accounting organization theory. And I want to do that in order to go beyond positivism and constructivism. I have a chapter in a book by Barbara Czerniawska where I call for negativism. So the move from positivism, so this is a glass, to a move towards a negativism. This is not a glass, and if it is not a glass, what it is and what it could be. But also beyond constructivism, they in a sense end with a reification of society, and the reification of beliefs, and the reification of things, and so we end up believing that this is a glass of water. And so I'm exploring in various of my contemporary or current papers, sorry, not contemporary, current papers, the importance of what is not there. This may sound a bit stupid and strange, or what is Paolo talking about? But I'll give you an example that possibly will clarify what I mean. Most of our decisions are dictated by what it is not there. When we buy a Coke Zero, we buy it because there is no sugar. Sometimes decisions are taken at meetings in a way rather than another because there were not people or there were not certain people at that meeting. There is a book which I have in my bookshelves here, which is called Nothing Happened, and the fact that nothing happened. So it's a history book, and it talks about how in certain moment in history, the fact that nothing happened generated consequences. So if we did not react to Putin's invasion, God knows where we would be now, or because we have invaded. I mean, because we have, he has invaded, and we had not done other things, and we could do other things. God knows what will happen. So I'm getting interested in the power of the negative, because nothing really matters. So what is there, not as a presence but as an absence, really matters. There was I saw a hand up before. If you still want to ask the question, just unmute yourself, and I will be very happy to answer before I move on.
I was interested in asking, that's me, Mohammed. I'm attending with my wife, Firdaus, actually. So both of us are actually listening to that. Both of us are accounting academics. Anyways, my question was, which sort of like accounting research looks at different ways of organizing whether assets or liabilities? Like if I want to know more about different ways than the classical ways of classifying and putting assets into the financial statements, or putting the different categories that we have of assets, liabilities, equities, and so on. What type of research and what sort of keywords could I use to search for those different models, if you will?
Yeah, thank you, Ferris. It's a very, very interesting, question. And this, I started with Anthony Hopwood, and maybe I should go back to Anthony Hopwood. And Anthony Hopwood said, look, Paolo, in IOS, we do a lot of accounting history. And we do a lot of accounting history exactly because we want to defamiliarize our understanding of contemporary accounting by looking at the existence of alternatives. In fact, if I go back to the presentation here, to this slide here, this is taken from an article in AOS that was talking about IRI. You see that there is Italian lira billions that was talking about IRI in 1986, I believe. So I think that history is a great way of looking at alternatives, because now we live in a world where there are no alternatives. I may ask a question to all of you who are in this Zoom seminar. How many formats of income statement do you know? And how many formats of balance sheet do you know? I studied 6 formats of income statement and 3 formats of balance sheet. Now when we teach 1 and 1, or maybe 2 and 1, but not 6. And that, in rhetoric, and rhetoric has got a huge influence on the development of accounting. Inventory is not an accounting term; it's a rhetorical term from inventio. And in rhetoric, they say there is no inventio, there is no classification if there is no intentio, if there is no purpose. But they don't use the idea of objective; they use the idea of intention. And so the Italians know this very well. Depending what your intention is, you draw the income statement in a different way because you want to change the focus. You want to see certain other things. Unfortunately, I have to say that the current, what counts as research at the moment is not very much into diversity of models, is either a critique of the mainstream and very little normative normative alternative. Now, I think that the times are mature, and of course there are colleagues around the journals like Accounting Organizations and Society, Critical Perspectives in Accounting, Accounting Audit and Accountability Journal that are trying to propose something different, and this is where I'm also going with my presentation in the next slide. So I think that we have accumulated so much knowledge about how accounting can actually differ, how accounting can actually be can actually work in different ways and for different purposes, that we are ready to become a bit normative. And so in the next slide, what I would like to do is actually to be a bit normative. And here, this is a bit of a critique of this crazy infatuation with the idea of transparency. I don't know if you look at this picture, what do you see? You see the SDGs, number 1, poverty, number 12, 13, lots of flags. But there is, if you look better, there is actually a guy there. You see the eyes, you see the arms, you see the shoes, and he's holding a text, which I think is future. But all of that is invisible because Liu Bolin, this is the name of this artist, plays with the idea of transparency. We believe in transparency, but he becomes transparent, invisible, as if we could see through him. But this is just an illusion. And so the current enlargement of the realm of the measurable from financial to non-financial measures is still very much infatuated with this idea of transparency, as if we have not learned from financial reporting that transparency is a dream. It cannot be achieved. It's more likely that, in fact, we cannot make things transparent, but actually exactly because we cannot make things transparent, we can design an accounting system in a different way. The story of Erie tells us that if you put at the core as an underlying principle of a design of accounting system, the mystery, you get a different accounting system, which operates with value added, where it is not clear what this value is, and you have to negotiate with all of the stakeholders from time to time in order to define the correct value. Even more, there is a nice structure of the income statement that Zapp and his pupils defined, where that income statement, rather than projecting certainty into the user or true and fair values, projects doubts, because they knew that there is not such a thing as a given value, as an objective notion of value. And if you put this lack of objectivity at the core of the design of accounting policies and techniques, you get a different kind of accounting. So the story about Erie, for me, I've got different papers about this. One is published in RSO, which is on varieties of capitalism. One is at the moment submitted to a journal where we make this point. We make the point of, if rather than seeking transparency, accounting recognize the impossibility of being transparent, what kind of accounting system would you get? You would get the accounting system that Erie designed. Now, out of that experience, which is a value-added statement where you have revenues, and then you create this, you calculate this value, but you calculate this value to actually debate what common good means, and then you distribute this through different stakeholders. Imagine what difference it would make if we add another stakeholder to the list that we have, and that is nature, a stakeholder with no voice. And so we could add a provision. This is the paper that is in JJJ just published. We could add a provision, and that provision could then create a fund for nature in the balance sheet, and you in a sense would internalize the externalities rather than saying we keep the accounts as we always have done so far with corporate capitalism idea in mind, and then we develop other kinds of measures separate from that, so that we can keep doing what we're doing, and then we give you some measures to show you that we are environmental friendly or socially inclusive or whatever. The example I always use here is an old example. Very likely now this does not apply anymore. But when I was at Oxford teaching corporate reporting, I did an interesting analysis of how McDonald's prepared its corporate disclosure according to the GRI principles. And the GRI principles defined the quality of food served in a chain of restaurants as the average calories intake of the menu of a restaurant. So that led McDonald's to introduce salad in the menus. So before there was only the burger. After that the definition of what is good food, they introduced the salad in the menu. What was the effect of that? The effect was paradoxical. So rather than pursuing the interests of the public, you were creating a measure that protected McDonald's. In what way? Because it shifts the responsibility to the customer. So while before you had only one choice, and it was my fault if I served you bad meat, now I can keep serving you bad meat, but you have a choice. You have salad there. And so then if you decide to eat bad meat, it's not my fault, I gave you the salad. What people do not know is that McDonald's was one of the sponsors of the GRI initiative. And so when they defined that measure, exactly because measures are never objective and they're always subject to manipulation, then better to define a measure of quality of food in a way that makes our sponsor happy rather than make the public safe. So in this way, instead, we bring back into the financial calculation how firms relate not only to social matters, employees are there. And so interesting, if you move from an income statement that pursues profit to an income statement that instead pursues value added, the employees change their ontology. Here, they're no longer a resource to be squeezed. They are a production factor to be remunerated as much as capital, as much as the state, as much as the firm, as much as the stakeholders. So a small change makes a huge change in the system of reporting. And so here, firms can also report zero, but then they have to explain to the public why they have zero. If they report 100, they have to explain why they report 100. And also the most important thing is, if we generate this wealth and we want to regenerate natural capital or give something back to nature because the resources that we have consumed cannot be replaced, who is going to pay for those? Are we taking that money away from the employees? Are we taking those resources away from the banks, from the state, because we pay less taxes because we're more environmental friendly? From the firm, and we will not generate the conditions for the firm to exist, or from the shareholders who will have to sacrifice a bit of their dividends in order to give back to nature. So this is, I think, a very elegant and powerful solution, and also a solution that could link the value chain to the supply chain and to how we pursue and relate to the various SDGs. So we create a space for reflecting on how the production of value and the distribution of value affects the various SDGs, which of course are quite ambiguous. Actually, the fact that they're ambiguous is a good thing. It's not a bad thing in my view, because you can explore then the relationships between various parts of the production and distribution of value, the interdependencies and things of that kind. So again, here, what we do not know and what we need to explore is at the center of the reporting system. And then very quickly, I'll move to another area that I'm developing. This is in a couple of months, we will have the coronation of the new king, King Charles. This was the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, the first coronation ceremony that was broadcasted on TV. And when the queen or when the monarch becomes monarch, he or she is anointed with the holy oil. And that veil that you see comes under the head of the future monarch, and no one can see that anointing movement. This is the first broadcasted ceremony, and Prince Edward, the Duke of Windsor, was in exile in Paris, was watching it with his friends on TV, and one of his friends said, you know, now that we've got this technology, we should see the moment in which she's anointed. We should see. We should make everything transparent. What did he reply? He replied, "Who wants transparency when you can have magic?" And I think that is an interesting way of looking at accounting. And I'll tell you why. Maybe I'll go back to this during the Q&A question, because not many people know that accounting is, you know, intertwined with not only with religion, which is what I've been trying to do in the last 30 years of my career, but also with magic. Not many people know, and actually this was a discovery by Elena Giovannoni, who is the co-author of this paper that we are writing, that the author of the Summa, the famous Summa, Luca Pacioli, was author of 3 different treatises. So one was the Summa about proportions, proportionalities, because proportions, remember that photography in Sorrentino's film, being in the middle, being balanced is a key to wisdom. And so that was the link between, for instance, accounting and religious issues. So not only was the author of a treatise of arithmetics, geometry, and accounting, so all the practices that that deal with the idea of rationality, of the fact that you have to be balanced, that you have to be proportioned. This is why rationality is called rationality, because ratio in Latin means proportion, and account. It does not mean reason. But he also wrote a book on games, and the word game and play in Latin is ludo, and that links to in ludo, illusions. And so in order to buy into accounting, you have to play, you have to be illuded, you have to be enchanted by the numbers. And this is why the 3rd treatise that he wrote was on the magic power of numbers. And so while in my past 30 years, I've explored how accounting has been related to religion quite a lot, so much that actually it creates beliefs, and it works because it works, and it spreads because it uses the same rhetorical tricks, I would say, that religion utilizes. The next, maybe not 30, because I will be dead in 30 years, but maybe the next 10 years will be to explore the links between accounting, religion, and magic. Just a couple of things before I finish to convince you that this is a good path forward. Newton was an alchemist. And so there's a book that I've got there, which is called Newton the Alchemist. And he could not have done physics without he being an alchemist. Some words that we use normally have a magic connotation. When I say spelling, and so when I speak, and hopefully I've enchanted you with my speech, although I saw that quite a few people left, so I'm not a great rhetorician, very likely. But spelling comes from spell, and so you enchant people with your talk. Or even more, grammar comes from grammaire, which means magical knowledge. And what I found a lot of relationship between rhetoric and accounting, I think I now will try to find a relationship between rhetoric, accounting, and magic. And I would possibly stop here. So thank you very much. Maybe I talked a bit too much, but you know, I'm available for until 4:30, so we can have Q&A for as much as you want. So thank you, Mohamed. Back to you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Paolo, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation and excellent topic. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any question, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Hi, Paolo.
Hi, Cam. How are you?
I'm really good. I love the variations on the income statement. And I've been puzzling over where I saw something like that. I've been searching for the past several years for one of the articles that I had read that showed that transformation of the income statement to show the value created and how it's distributed. So I'm hoping you can point me to some resources I can use in my teaching that would show students how to invert or subvert the assumptions in the income statement.
Yeah, also policy. I mean, first of all, the fourth European directive, the first attempt to standardize internationally accounts, had two options. One was the Anglo-American one was the continental one. The continental one was at the classification of items by nature, not by function. So it was prone to the creation of value-added statements. And Italy adopted the value-added statement, not the profit-oriented statement. In Italy, we have a different way of calling them, so we can call them in different ways. In English, I don't know how you would call them because you will learn only one. So while in Italy, we learn 6 of them. I have a small article, 2006, I believe. But also this one on value added is in AOS. So, and you know that in the 80s in AOS, the idea of value added was pretty much present in the literature. If you don't mind sending me an email, I will be super happy to point you to those.
Yeah, I ran afoul of Google Scholar trying to find the right search term to bring it up. I looked and just couldn't find the article. And I had the picture of the income statement in my head, but you can't Google an image in your head. Not yet,
we also in Italy we have a textbook. It's called Ranalli sulla capacità informativa della struttura di bilancio, which shows the different format of income statement. And value added will be one of those. This is how we were trained. So it's not it's really, I would say, at least okay. Let's use the word interesting rather than saying tragic. How very quickly in the span of 30 years, we've forgotten that entirely. And so now the obvious way is one income statement only, and that's it. Forget about the other.
Yeah, right. Good. I'll send you the email.
Yeah, thank you.
If anyone have any questions, Amin, you have a question?
So thank you. I'm very aligned to your overall message, and I believe that absence of information is information indeed, just like Sherlock Holmes observed that about the dog that did not bark. So I wonder what would happen if a multinational did not disclose things on ESG, if it was not required, if it was just voluntary information. My other comment is on your different formats of income statement, the stock price, the efficient market that we're led to believe, looks at the residual interest of the shareholders. So what would happen if we took very good care of our employees, but not the shareholders, or we took very good care of the state by paying more taxes than necessary, or maybe not optimizing tax planning? How would the stock market react, assuming it's efficient and assuming it's a public company and all of that? So once again, I'm very aligned to your message, but just trying to push a bit more. Thanks.
I think you're making an excellent point in both comments. So the first one about the the lack. Sometimes it's more important when you go to meetings, what is not said, it's more important than what is said, right? Or also in psychology is what I've learned from Tamar Zilber, my next co-editor-in-chief of organization studies. In psychology, when you interview people who have gone through traumas, what they do not say is much more important than what they say. And this is also the case of the example of McDonald's. What they do not say is more important than what they project. So they project a measure of a good quality of food, but what they do not disclose is much more important. So I agree entirely on that point. On the second point, it's a governance issue. Let me share this slide again. it's a matter of rationality. So what I want to say is, first of all, we cannot have this format of income statement exactly because of the corporate governance that we currently have, where the purpose of the firm is that of safeguarding the return on shareholders' equity. So, and this is why the Erie case is important. I can share it with you. I have a small. It's difficult. I have a small article that is here. I'll share it in the chat. Where the original title was supposed to be "No Purpose is Better Than One," and then they like the idea of the J's as usual, and they changed. But if you read the second part of this magazine article, I say that no purpose is the only way in which you can balance the interests of different stakeholders. Now, going back to the income statement for nature, so the value-added statement for nature, we found one company in Italy that does have that line where they make the nature a stakeholder, but they can do that because it's a public utility and they are in an area of Italy which is so special they can do their own laws. We also found a real estate company quite big in Germany where the CFO wanted to implement that solution, and the auditors told him, you cannot do it because it goes against the idea of single materiality. So unless we change the idea of single materiality and we move to at least a double materiality, if not a dynamic materiality, then we will not solve the problem. And I think all of these plethora of measures that we are developing will make things more opaque, no more transparent. I also said another thing in quite a few occasions. With the enlargement of the realm of the measurable, if we don't change the epistemology behind this measurement, we will have an explosion of scandals. Before we had only scandals about financial reporting, in the future we will have also tons of scandals on ESG and SDG reporting, because unless we change the epistemology or the principle underpinning the measurement, I don't think we will change anything. So, Roy.
Yes, thank you for an excellent presentation. It was very interesting to listen to you. I previously used to study philosophy, so listen to your presentation. I come to think of the work of deconstructionism, and particularly the work of Derrida. Have you seen anyone doing that in accounting, or are there any resources related to deconstruction?
Yeah. If you allow me the comment, you arrive a bit late. So we have had not in the mainstream accounting, but in what is called interdisciplinary accounting or critical accounting, around journals like Accounting Organizations and Society, or Critical Perspectives on Accounting, or Accounting Audit and Accountability Journal. Tons of paper that were driven by a deconstruction movement, including Derrida. If I'm not wrong, our international Schreiker used Derrida, but Derrida has been used quite a lot, as much as, of course, Foucault has been used so much that now I would say it's mainstream in accounting, to the point that maybe we only use Foucault now. Latour has been used quite a lot, and I would encourage young people to go beyond that. This is why I said at the beginning, I want to go not only beyond positivism, which has been done, but also beyond constructivism, because constructivism in a sense ends where positivism begins. And so I think and this is why I want to put mystery at the center, because mystery is about what you cannot really know. And so it's not that you construct in reality and then you behave according to a taken for granted notion of what is right behavior, because you do not know what the right behavior is. For this, for instance, an author that I like quite a lot is Agamben, if you know him. and I've used Agamben, and I'm using again Agamben this time. Yeah, Amin.
Yeah, just one more angle to pursue. You see, from what I understand, the accounting system was developed using the matching principle, and our main objective is to predict future income, or future cash flows rather, through income statements. So you predict future accrual income, and then from there future cash flows, which is what drives everything. And therefore, it was important for us to match expenses. So all the debates we have had in financial accounting, such as should stock options be expensed, they've gone through, look, there are costs to the shareholders, therefore they should be expensed so that the income will be reflective of what can be extrapolated to future years. Other measures, and again, I'm sympathetic to the overall message. So other messages such as values for the environment and so on may not be equally extrapolable from one annual number. Hence, the financial metric has taken, the shareholder metric has taken a bigger importance in that sense. Just laying it out for arguments. I would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I understood your final point, but on the accruals, you may not know, but the first time the accruals were described in accounting textbook was by a Jesuit in 1636. And you know why the accruals were designed? Because before the accruals, the accountants would collect entries in their books until the pages ended. This is why we say closing the books and opening the books. You would collect all the entries until the pages of the book ended, and that could be every 5 or 6 years. They were big books. And this guy said, look, we cannot wait 7 years to reflect on whether what we're doing is right or wrong. And so we have to generate a technical solution to stop and reflect. And that was the translation of a rhetorical special technique, which is the maze or the labyrinth, to stop. So you face a wall and then you think, do I go right or do I go left? And this is why accounting is all in dichotomies, expenses and revenues, assets and liabilities. I face a wall and I say, is this an expense or is this an asset? So how do I book it? And you may not know, but in English, I don't know whether Cam knows, English is not my first language, but in English they say amazing, because if you get all the right decisions and so got right or left correctly, then you get out of the maze and you are amazed. So this is why in English they say amazing. So the accrual system was not there to measure the future income. The accrual system was designed to reflect on your morality and say, are we doing well or not? That was the reason why the accruals were invented in the first place. And the same thing with that provision for nature. You stop and you reflect. I do not know how much nature I've consumed. I do not know how much natural capital I've consumed. I have to I have to reflect on how humans and non-humans relate to each other, and how humans are actually part of the non-human environment, and therefore I have to stop and reflect. On the second part, I mean, I'm not sure that I understood your point. So if this answer is not exactly what you had in mind, maybe you want to elaborate a bit more, and we can have a chat, and then I'll go to Ferdi.
I will not. Thank you. I appreciate your, and I'm agreeing with everything you've said so far. But more recently, the periodic concept has taken a bigger role in accounting, which is we report every equal period, whether it is every quarter or every year. And the more important function of accounting has become to predict the future year's income, given this year's income calculated using the matching principle consistently with previous years. So if I change any accounting rule in measuring it, I have to restate the previous year so that they can be comparable. That seems to be the bigger role, and that's what we teach our students who then go and work. So what I'm trying to say is, in some areas, some other goals such as environmental reporting, we might later on see the merit of reporting things consistently, periodically, of same dimension periods like quarter or month or year. And then to basically later on, we might again get into the things of how do we then predict the performance of this company in its environmental performance for the next quarter. Those are the, like even when we measure our blood pressure or any cholesterol level, we're also trying to say, what will it be next quarter, next year? Thanks.
But on that point, I mean, two observations. First of all, the fact that accounting is in that way, it does not have to be the way. So this is what this paper is about. There are different forms of accounting, and they not only worked, but they worked very successfully, and they worked for hundreds of years. Okay, so that is the first message. The second message I forgot what I wanted to say. The first message is the fact that at the moment this is what accounting does not mean that accounting cannot do other things. Accounting has the tendency to become what it was not, and so it could be reinvented. The other point hopefully will come back, because I thought it was even more important than the first one. So apologies, it may come back. Fairness.
It's her husband again, Mohammed, actually. But my question has to do, because I'm taking a similar approach to Roy over here. I'm reading lots of philosophy, and I wanted to ask you whether you are familiar with the work of Deleuze, the assemblage theory, and whether you're familiar with any accounting literature actually making use of those sort of philosophical notions.
Deleuze has not, I mean, if you asked me 2 years ago or 5 years ago, which authors would have become the new Latour or the new Foucault, I would have said Agamben and Deleuze. But neither of them as developed as I thought they would. I think that there are some people who use Deleuze in accounting, especially the idea of repetition. In my work on the Jesuit, I use the word indifference, because the Jesuit, when they take decisions, praise indifference, but I use it in a Deleuzian way, in a sense, because being indifferent means for the Jesuit to be in the middle of difference, and the stability of the institution is made by the proliferation of difference, not by the homogenization of the same. I think that Deleuze is a very interesting and productive source of inspiration. It's very difficult to read, especially in English. So if you can read it in a Latin language, that would help. So I have difference and repetition in Italian, and I have it in English, and the English version is really difficult to follow, while the Italian version is better because it's closer to French. I remember what I wanted to say to Amin. Do you know why we use the word record, accounting record, or statistical record? Very likely you don't, and there is nothing wrong with that. Being Italian helps. But when the Jesuit met with the two keys and they had to decide whether to spend money or to cash money, the numbers were recorded after the decision was made. So there was a material mechanism through which the two people met. It was a procedural rationality, so it was not defined upfront when it is right or wrong to spend money, and exactly because it was not defined upfront, but they defined the procedures to understand what it was right or wrong. Then they had to remember, because record comes from recordor, to remember in Latin. They had to remember why they took that particular decision, and so what was a right decision in one moment in time or in one space could be the wrong decision in another moment in time in another space. So the entries in the journal were very long, because they had to explain why in that particular case they make the decision in that way, not the other. That allowed comparability, because knowing that you will never face the same situation creates a fake idea of comparability. It's like when you compare, in that very same lecture that when I talked about corporate reporting, I compared 4 different financial reports from 4 different airlines, 3 of them prepared with IFRS, but if you look at how they calculated operating income, it was completely different. So they talked about the same thing, but they calculated it in a completely different way. But you had very little, you are forced to believe that these things are actually the same because they are comparable and the auditors have stamped the truth. While in the Middle Ages, early modern times, 1980, when I went to the university, this was not the idea. The idea was, if I want to compare, I need to understand what is behind. And what is behind is always different. And we go back to the idea of difference of the loose. Fair loose again, unless there are others.
Yeah, I was just very interested in asking you, given that you just said that if I asked you 5 years ago, you'd say Deleuze is probably going to be the next Foucault. Now I'm asking you now, who do you think is going to be the next Foucault when it comes to accounting literature?
If you want me to be truly honest, I think that the future of interdisciplinary accounting is at risk at the moment. So I'm not sure that there will be another author in 10 years. We may all be disappeared in 10 years. Maybe Cam, what do you think?
I have questions about the whole model of education that we got right now. It seems to be under attack. In 20 years' time, nobody may have the kinds of jobs that we have now, especially when you look at the precarity of labor in the academy. The whole notion of knowledge and thinking is being undermined politically. Yeah. So we're fighting an uphill battle, if not a losing one.
Yeah, I don't want to sound too pessimist, but I would underwrite what Cam is saying. So yeah, I think at certain forms of speculative thinking, or also interdisciplinary thinking, are now unthinkable. If you think of what happened in the 80s with AOS, it would be, I think it could potentially happen in practice, but not at the university, that's for sure. So I'm preparing at the moment the lecture. This year I was very lucky, I got 2 prizes. So one for this article in AAJ on inserting the nature thing. The other one is the interdisciplinary thought leader of the European Institute for Advanced Studies in Management. Very, very nice of them to think of me. But the title of that talk is The University Outside the University. I'm not entirely sure that in the future, these kind of conversations will happen within the university. Yesterday, I had a chat with a venture capital investor in Silicon Valley, because he wants to invest in an idea that comes out of this article. That conversation was much more interesting than some of the conversation I have with colleagues within academia. Because now conversation with colleagues within academia is, where you published, what is your WAM, which is the work allocation model, who do you cite? It's also interesting to see how super silos we have become, so that people cite, a small example, the other day, a colleague who is a smart colleague told me, look, Paolo, I'm doing this paper on rationality, and we have an idea of doing another paper together on rationality. And I said, look, oh, good. So did you quote the paper on unfolded rationality? He said, no, I didn't. And I said, why? I know, because we've been discussing about these ideas, and that paper, I know that relates to the ASQ paper. Oh no, if I cite that paper, it may go to a neo-institutionalist. And I don't want the paper to go to a new institutionalist. Oh, okay. So is this where we ended up? That you cannot quote a paper because because you are in a so refined network of relationships that if you quote outside that small field, you are in trouble, and there is no theoretical contribution. Then, wow. Okay, 30 years ago, this was not an issue.
Yeah.
If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Sorry, it's Amin again. Can I follow up with one more, like about your response before that a record was after the fact on how to classify whether something was an expense or an asset. They would then decide and write long journal entries, and that's very interesting. I didn't realize that. I suppose there was room for new knowledge. Like maybe they're always, maybe they were giving out, mixing metaphors, they were giving out stock options, and up to now, they never expensed it. And now all of a sudden they said, wow, this is an expense, so let's start expensing it. So they changed their thinking. There should be room for new thinking. And if they changed it, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it's not that there is room, there is also a need for a new thinking. If we keep doing what we're doing, there is no hope that the nature will be saved, but also most of the money is actually off balance sheet. So this financialization of the economy has brought lots of the money out of the financial reports. So some of the finance innovations that we have seen is exactly to make sure that the funds do not pass through the financial reports. So I think that there is a need for that, but are there the political conditions for a difference? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. The lobbies are not even the pandemic managed to create a crack into the corporate capitalist system. Not even the pandemic, the most dramatic thing we have experienced in the last maybe 100 years, apart from the Second World War. Not even that. We keep doing things as we did before. You know why I always say that? You know why? And sorry, I should stop sharing because this is no longer useful. You know why I always say that IRI could exist and they could try new things? Because there was a huge tragedy before the war that required a new system, and that was the Second World War. Without the Second World War, they would not have been able to do what they did. No way, no way. So we need a much bigger collapse in order to redefine the rules of how we govern our societies. And I fear that the next collapse will not be the Second World War. It will be, something potentially even more disruptive. But I do have faith in the human being. We're not that stupid, or not that stupid yet.
Hey, Olvera, you have a question? Yeah, you can ask.
Joao.
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon. Two questions in my mind at the moment. So when you discussed that provision for nature, that obliges companies and accountants to stop and think about that impact. Of course, that we already have a very limited scope. We already have regulations that, for example, for mining companies, they have to create provisions so that at the end of their license, of their exploration license, they have to rebuild the site, so they have to provision for that. Mm-hmm. Now, that, of course, is a very limited scope. Yeah. So now we are seeing new directives using the point of the concept of double materiality, and you have even mentioned dynamic materiality, etc. Now, so my first question is, to what extent are the current conditions, current situation, the current crisis suitable to expand situations in which these reflections and actions become more widespread, rather than the very specific situation of mining companies having to rebuild the sites? That's the first thing. The second is a broader question. How do you think the auditing profession would feel like in this more fluid state in which what is right or wrong is not so obvious? Because auditing is about trying to, reassure that this is according to this and that. We see auditing firms entering into the assurance of non-financial reporting, and they're entering that. How do they feel in this more fluid state of what is not clear, what is right or wrong? So
yeah, very excellent comment and question, Joel. Thank you for both of them. I start from the profession. When I gave the PD lecture, that unfortunately has been now deleted, there is no longer the lecture on the ICAW website, but I made a point that responded to your question, which is, look, guys, your legitimacy depends on the fact that you have to exercise judgment, because if you're there about measuring things, informatics will do for you. So if it is about data and transparency, you are not in the business of data. You were in the business of data when data were small, but now that they're big, you are no longer in that business. While you're in the business of judgment. And exactly because, a bottle of water here is worth £1, and a bottle of water in the desert is worth 1,000 pounds. And if the thirsty person is Bezos, is possibly worth 1 billion pounds, exactly because value is an uncertain and mysterious category, then you have a reason of existence. But the moment in which you praise and you follow the ideology that value can be measured, you don't have any job. There is no job for you. There is no reason of existence for the accountants, while there is a reason of existence for the algorithms that will collect data and generate truth. So if that is what drives accounting, there is no room for accountants. And I think it's a matter of training as well. This year I had a great teaching experience. It was the first time after a few years that I taught the undergraduates. And I taught the PwC. So we got an accounting degree in collaboration with PwC. And I was teaching advanced management accounting in the third year. And they got 3 years of technical training, taxation, all of these things, believing that accounting was technical. And I gave, I can't remember how many lectures, 7 lectures for 14 hours of this kind of stuff that you saw today. They were enlightened. They understood what actually an accountant could do. When I was talking about ERI, I told them, you see what you can do, and you think that this may not relate to you, but with PwC, you may be sent to Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine, exactly as these guys rebuilt Italy after the Second World War. You see what you can do. And for them was a revelation. So I think it's a matter of training, but also a matter of training the profession. The example of the mining industry is amazing. Thank you, Joel, because I knew that, but I didn't think about that. And so also with this SEMA project, we didn't look at the mining industry. So we look at the utilities, but we didn't think about the mining industry. And I remember also the accounting techniques that they use in order to reconstitute. So that is a very, very interesting cue, and I will feed back to Ariel and the others. Thank you for that.
If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. If anyone have any question, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Excuse me, if I know that we're running out of time, but I just want to add something related with the extractive industries. This new legislation to report what these kind of companies have to pay to governments is also intends to create some transparency on one of those perspectives that you've mentioned. So to what extent do these companies contribute to the local economies in the form of taxes, licenses, whatever, various categories. And Jim Aslan and some other colleagues have collected information about the impacts of that legislation in various countries. You may be aware of that book. So that's also another avenue in which these other stakeholders are given more salience, and some visibility about the contribution of these companies towards these economies.
Yeah. And this is also why we looked at that utility, because the utility works exactly in that way, because it was an hydropower company, so they were using water, and when you use water, there are lots of complications there. Also, killing the fish. There was a trade-off between producing energy and killing the fish. How would you give back to the community But I would not say it was a matter of transparency, because the process was very political. And so they had a governance of the process that was highly political, but political in a good sense, not in a bad sense. So of creating a platform where you have to strike a compromise. One last thing, if I can say, part of the problem is also the lack of supply of people who are interested in different forms of accounting. So seminars like this are actually important to make sure that we, create. We fail to appoint lecturers in interdisciplinary accounting these days, so we don't have PhD students. Partly is also due to what Cameron was saying, that who would do a PhD in accounting if your scholarship is 18K a year or 15K a year? I mean, it's not, it's the competition with the profession is so high that, or even with a normal job, is so high that no one invests in a PhD anymore. But let's see. I'm still a bit more optimistic than Cam, but maybe because Cam is a couple of years older than me.
Could be.
It could be, right? Yeah.
I appreciate your optimism. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Pablo, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you very much for taking the time to present it to us today. It's been really appreciated. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, joined us today. Thank you.
Thanks,
thanks
thanks,
to
Paolo.
you, man.
Thank you.
And also, sorry if it took me so long to accept your invitation. I know that this was done.
Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. We really appreciate it.
And I hope to see you soon in Egypt, dear Professor Pablo. You are very, very welcome.
Thank you. That would be lovely. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Good to see you.
See you, Paolo.